About 100 degrees in the garage today. I'm going to call this the high temperature garage series. Making this video because a student asked me to help them this week on what is the difference between spec limits and control limits. So this usually comes about when they're taking my course material dealing around capability and control charting, and it's often confused. So spec limits come from the customer. So for example, consulting in the poultry industry for a few years, a Burger King chicken breast fillet. So let's say I measure hundreds of chicken breasts in a random sample, right? I'm going to get some average chicken breast thickness. Well, spec limits from Burger King are that they don't want any chicken breasts below 13 millimeters because the whole process of cooking them in the store is to drop them in 350 Fahrenheit oil for 1 minute. So below 13 they'll burn. So any chicken breasts here are defects. And above 19 millimeters thick, they won't get cooked all the way. So if there's one or two up there, those are defects. So those are spec limits. So a service example, I did a human resources project and we decided that this is people being hired, probably not so many. Anybody that took longer than 30 days is a defect. And just for those of you in services, HR, finance, accounts, payables, you typically only have an upper spec limit. It shouldn't take longer than, where manufacturing deals a lot with parts that must fall within a range. So spec limits come from the customer, they do not come from the data. Now, control charts. Control charts are simply histograms drawn on their side. So again, what would the line in the middle be? It'll be the average. Now that is calculated from the data. Then what a control chart does is it draws a line at plus 3 standard deviations and a line at minus 3 standard deviations. So a control chart is calculating this information from your data. Control limits do not come from the customer, or, by the way, when I mean customer, that doesn't mean the end user, it's the customer of the process. But in this case, Burger King defined that, 13 or 19 millimeters. In this case of 30 days, that was the HR director, okay? So what a control chart then does is plot the last hires, for example, with the HR data. We would start to get some movement. Okay, and then the control chart is where you look for special cause variation. Variation that is not random is basically the term. So for example, we could have had someone out here that was, watch this, that was hired in 28 days. Now notice, that's not a defect. The HR manager said don't go over 30. So this is an example where the control limit is different than a specification limit. It is saying that we had a really good, let's say this is 15. We've had a pretty decent process of hiring people right around 15, not a lot of movement there. So this person hired at 28 days is outside 99% of all of our data. That's what a control chart is looking at. That's one of the exact types of special cause variations. So in this example, we have an outlier. It's outside 99% of our data. However, it is not a bad hire because it did not exceed 30 days. So spec limits come from the customer. Control limits come from the data. Now, one quick pet peeve. You need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 data points in a row on a control chart to have a trend. This is why you cannot use a line chart in Excel to see if you have a trend or special cause variation, because it does not do the statistical mathematical calculations necessary for that. I just want to bring that up because people are notorious for, let's say this is a line chart in Excel, oh my gosh, look at the trend. And then I go plot that same data here and there's no trend. So if you're interested in trends, you folks in sales and marketing, you should be using an IMR chart, not an Excel line chart that you've inserted for yourself. Okay, so spec limits versus control limits, there you go.